I've lived here most of my life now, as you know, and I couldn't have made the records I made in any other place. So I thank all the artists and all the journalists and everybody for remembering me. Thank you.
Few artists have traveled a stranger road than Scott Walker. In the 1960s, he was a teen idol whose face appeared on magazine covers and whose records rivaled the biggest acts in Britain. By the end of his life, he was creating unsettling musical landscapes filled with dissonance, orchestral eruption, and lyrics inspired by history, cinema, violence, and existential philosophy. The journey from The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore to albums like Tilt, The Drift, and Bish Bosch was the story of a man gradually abandoning commercial success in pursuit of artistic freedom, even when that freedom led him far from the mainstream.
Hi, this is the Lester Bureau YouTube channel. Here I tell stories about music you might find interesting. So let's dive into the career of Scott Walker.
Scott Walker was born Niall Scott Angle on January 9, 1943 in Hamilton, Ohio. His father worked in the oil industry, causing the family to move frequently during Scott's childhood. After his parents separated, he eventually settled in California with his mother. Long before becoming a rock star, Angle worked as a child actor and singer. During the 1950s, he appeared in television programs and Broadway production and even recorded a handful of teen pop singles. Yet despite these early brushes with show business, he never fit comfortably into the image of the conventional young entertainer. As a teenager in Los Angeles, he immersed himself in progressive jazz, literature, and European art films. He admired musicians such as Bill Evans and Stan Kenton, while filmmakers like Ingmar Bergman, Federico Fellini, and Robert Bresson shaped his imagination. He read the beat writers, attended art school, and developed interests that separated him from the surf rock culture dominating California at the time. Music was becoming important, but so were ideas. The combination would define everything he later created. In the early 1960s, Angle began working as a bassist in various Los Angeles groups. Then he met singer and guitarist John Mouse. Together with drummer Gary Leeds, they formed the Walker Brothers, despite not actually being brothers. The trio moved to Britain in 1965, a decision that changed their lives. Their first major breakthrough came with Love Her, which showcased Scott's deep and dramatic baritone voice. Soon afterward, he became the band's main singer. The Walker Brothers quickly became one of Britain's biggest acts. Their pop sound, heavily influenced by Phil Spector's Wall of Sound, produced a series of hits including Make It Easy on Yourself, My Ship Is Coming In, and the massive chart topper The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore.
At the height of their popularity, Walker Brothers concerts inspired scenes of hysteria similar to Beatlemania.
Their fan club reportedly became larger than the Beatles' official fan club. Scott Walker, with his dark looks and powerful voice, became a genuine pop phenomenon. Behind the success, tensions were growing.
Walker was taking greater responsibility for arranging material and guiding recording sessions, while simultaneously feeling constrained by the expectations attached to pop stardom. His growing frustration was accompanied by heavy drinking and increasing emotional isolation.
By 1967, the Walker Brothers had broken up. Freed from the group, Scott Walker immediately embarked on one of the most remarkable solo careers in popular music. His first 4 solo albums, Scott in 1967, Scott 2 in 1968, Scott 3 in 1969, and Scott 4 remain among the most celebrated records of his career. They blended orchestral pop, cabaret influences, and increasingly personal songwriting. A crucial influence was Belgian songwriter Jacques Brel. Walker's English-language interpretations of Brel's songs introduced many British listeners to a darker and more theatrical style of songwriting. Themes of loneliness, obsession, mortality, and social outsiders became central to his work. At first, commercial success continued. Scott too reached number 1 in the UK, while singles such as Joanna became hits. Scott too balanced accessible material with ambitious originals such as Plastic Pals People and the amorous Humphrey Plug.
Through cobblestone streets a child.
On Scott 3, Walker pushed even further. The album was dominated by his own compositions and included some of the most beautiful songs he ever wrote, including It's Raining Today, Big Louise, and 30th Century Man.
It's raining today.
These recordings revealed a songwriter fascinated by loneliness, failed dreams, and people living on society's margins. His lush orchestral arrangements, often created with arranger Angela Marley, gave the songs a cinematic touch unlike anything else in pop music. The culmination of this period was Scott 4. Released under his birth name, Scott Angle, Scott 4 abandoned cover songs entirely. Every track was written by Walker himself. Songs referenced Bergman films, political repression, and existential literature. Tracks such as The Seventh Seal, The Old Man's Back Again, and Angels of Ashes demonstrated a level of ambition rarely heard in popular music. Today, many critics regard Scott 4 as his masterpiece. At the time, however, it was a commercial disaster.
That I'm not the world's strongest man.
The failure of Scott 4 deeply affected Walker. Record companies wanted him to return to a safer, more commercial style. Rather than fight, he agreed.
Throughout the early 1970s, he released a series of albums filled largely with cover versions, movie themes, easy listening standards, and country-influenced material.
Sunshine.
Although Till the Band Comes In still contained flashes of brilliance, such as a brilliant track Stormy and several strong original songs, it also reflected the compromise Walker was being forced to make.
You were the sunshine, baby.
The albums that followed moved even further from his artistic ambitions. Later, Walker would describe this period as his lost years. He admitted that he was making records simply to satisfy contractual obligations, and that heavily drinking became an increasingly serious problem. The artist who had once created Scott 4 seemed to have disappeared, yet beneath the surface, he was preparing for another transformation. By the mid-1970s, Walker's solo career had stalled. A reunion with John Walker and Gary Leeds resulted in a temporary revival of the Walker Brothers. Their comeback single No Regrets became a hit, but the real significance of the reunion emerged in the group's final album, Night Flights, in 1978. Scott's 4 songs stood apart from everything else on the record. Night Flights, Shout Out, Fat Mama Kick, and especially The Electrician introduced a frightening new musical language. The songs were darker, stranger, and more experimental than anything he had previously recorded. Commercially, the album failed. Artistically, it changed a lot.
Baby, it's slow.
After the breakup of the Walker Brothers, Scott Walker largely vanished from public view. For years, he rarely appeared in public, gave few interviews, and released almost no new music. During this period, however, younger musicians began discovering his work. Admirers such as David Bowie and Brian Eno helped revive interest in his music. In 1984, Walker returned with Climate of Hunter, his first solo album in a decade. The record retained traces of rock music but fragmented them into mysterious, dreamlike forms. Traditional song structures were fading, melodies were becoming less important than atmosphere and emotional tension. The transformation that began on Night Flights was exhilarating.
The next step came in 1995 with Tilt. This album represented a radical break from conventional songwriting.
Orchestral arrangements collided with industrial textures and fragmented narratives. The music felt closer to modern classical composition than rock. Walker drew inspiration from subjects ranging from filmmaker Pier Paolo Pasolini to the political violence. Many listeners were bewildered, others called it a masterpiece. Walker no longer seemed interested in writing songs that could become hits. He was creating immersive sound worlds that demanded patience and concentration. If Tilt shocked audiences, The Drift in 2006 pushed even further into uncharted territory. The album combined orchestral music, abstract sound design, and historical themes. Recording sessions famously included unusual techniques, such as using slabs of raw meat as percussion.
The breaths are still heavy.
Despite its extreme nature, the album received widespread critical acclaim. Walker had become one of the most respected experimental artists in contemporary music.
A documentary, Scott Walker, 30th Century Man, released the same year, highlighted his influence on generations of musicians. Bowie, Radiohead, Brian Eno, Jarvis Cocker, and many others praised his artistic courage. Walker followed with instrumental work and then Bish Bosch in 2012.
While plucking feathers from a swan song, spring might gently...
By this point, he had effectively become a composer working somewhere between opera, avant-garde classical music, and experimental rock. His final major musical statement came with Soused in 2014, a collaboration with the drone metal group Sun. The partnership seemed unlikely on paper, but made perfect sense artistically. Both shared a fascination with scale, atmosphere, and overwhelming sound. Walker also composed acclaimed film scores, most notably for Polar X, The Childhood of a Leader, and Vox Lux. Scott Walker died in 2019 at the age of 76.
His career remains one of the most extraordinary revolutions in modern music. He began as a child performer, became a pop idol, transformed into an orchestral singer-songwriter, endured years of commercial disappointment, and ultimately emerged as one of the best experimental composers of his era.
His journey from The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore to Tilt, The Drift, and Bish Bosch was a relentless search for artistic truth. By the end of his life, Scott Walker had traveled farther than almost any musicians before him. The constant public attention and the demands of the music industry took a heavy toll on him. Walker later admitted that alcohol became a serious problem during parts of his career. At one point, he claimed to be drinking a bottle of wine and a bottle of scotch each day. As his solo career progressed, Walker's relationship with fame grew even more complicated. Success brought expectations he increasingly resented. Record companies wanted hit singles, television appearance, and safe material. Walker wanted artistic freedom. The conflict became especially painful after the commercial failure of Scott 4. Watching one of his best artistic statements fail commercially left him disillusioned with the music business. The 1970s became a period of frustration and self-doubt. His drinking worsened. Friends recalled a man who often seemed uncomfortable with attention. Yet the struggles also pushed Walker toward new artistic territory.
As he withdrew from public life, he immersed himself in reading, film, history, politics, and contemporary classical music. He became increasingly interested in difficult subjects: violence, power, death, religion, and the darker corners of human psychology. He wanted the music that could provoke, disturb, and confront. Thanks for watching. What do you think of Scott Walker? Which of his albums is your favorite? You can also follow me on Instagram and TikTok for more stories about music. Bye!